if I start telling people about hell, I might just scare them off. Where are you going to scare them off to? Hell number 2? Or are you just going to sit there and let them burn?
It's such a large concept, and it could go on forever talking about these things. But yeah, it's the Marvel comics. I'm not. You guys probably know a little bit. My older brother was really big into comics. I read a little bit. I read some when I was younger, but it's just all. It used to be that me and my friend would go down to the comic book store, and we had dollar comics, and so we would take our allowance and just go to the comics and try to find rare comics and buy them for $1, and it honestly, it was. I look back at it now, and it was like tame compared to what's in the comic book stores now. Have you ever walked through the comic book stores? I did 3 months ago just to see what was there, and it was like hardcore satanic propaganda, man. It was like priests were. It was like priests that were like all into death. It was all about sadomasochism. Mm-hmm. It was bizarre. I implore any parent or anybody that might be listening to this, go into a comic book store where your kid hangs out, and I guarantee you'll be horrified.
Yeah, and also with the occult, you have heavy soft porn in a lot of the major comic books because of the generation. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. When the comic book industry started off, it was mild. It wasn't as bad as it is now. However, there became a time, just like in the movie industry, where it got very graphic, very, very graphic. Wonder Woman was continually in bondage, but her beginnings are bad anyway. But anyway, it got very violent, very graphic. Everything, occult themes came in heavily, and so people protested against that, right? And not just Christians, regular families too. Then they had the prohibition against the comic book industry, and then it came back, and then they had to put mature stampings on it, the ratings system and everything like that. And so a lot of things got toned down, but then it started to come back around the time of around the time of the sexual revolution and stuff like that, if I'm not mistaken. Anyone can fact check me on that. But as you progressed into the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, you saw more themes that were regressed coming out, and now it's everywhere. And
well, Chris,
go ahead.
Before you go any further, remember the writer from the comic book. We have the clip tonight. The clip. I was trying to find it as you were talking about these writers and some of the things that they do. And people don't know this. They're so naive. But these people actually open themselves up for spirits to enter in, and they tell you themselves what they're trying to access. And so it's not only just the writers, but it's also in the movies, it's the producers, and that's what comes out in the comics. You talked about the different themes that we see in comics. Hey, I don't have to even go into a comic book store. The other day I was in the airport, in a major airport in the United States, and I went into one of the gift shops, and they had voodoo dolls for sale.
Yeah.
Voodoo dolls for kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So and I'm saying, okay, wow. Would you? Yes, and it was in the kids section where you could get the different, comics or the different trinkets for kids. But this is the world that we are coming into, and Christians might look at us today, or not Christians, but people in general might look at us today and say, you guys are crazy. But what is coming is so dark and so devious that, we better get into our word, and we need to really know who God is for ourselves. Like my brother said, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling.
Indeed. Before I play a clip, Theodore, you have anything to say about, we just talked about?
Yeah, just real quick. It's everywhere. I mean, if you go through Barnes and Noble, if you go to the teen section, they have like trending now books or bestsellers, and they always put up like homosexual type, like Johnny and James were good friends until they realized they love each other. Just weird stuff. And that goes in. If you go to the Shack, the documentary, I expose that Barnes and Noble and all these secularist, stores are hand in hand in cahoots with Christian stores, and whatever the higher ups, whatever Satan puts in, whatever Satan does, moving people, the chessboard that he has, they will take whatever crap that they can and push it on young people's minds. It really is very sick. And anybody who has some type of discernment or wants to know the Holy Spirit will start recognizing these things. And you guys, this show is a great job. You guys do such a great job. I'm so proud of you guys. People need to know this stuff.
Thank you. It's the Lord. It's the Lord and experience. I'm gonna read an excerpt from a book when we play the next clip. But people, before I even do that, realize this. We talked about the political atmosphere and the atmosphere worldwide in our education system and our entertainment. And think about this. Ask yourself, why is it over the last year, 2 years, have all of these things converged at the same time? Ask yourself that question. I'm going to have the answer for you after these clips.
On my 40th birthday, rather than merely bore my friends by having anything as mundane as a midlife crisis, I decided it might be more interesting to actually terrify them by going completely mad and declaring myself to be a magician. This had been something that had been coming for a while. It seemed to be a logical end step in my career as a writer. And the problem is that with magic, being in many respects a science of language, you have to be very careful what you say, because if you suddenly declare yourself to be a magician without any knowledge of what that entails, then one day you are likely to wake up and to discover that that is exactly what you are. There is some confusion as to what magic actually is. I think that this can be cleared up if you just look at the very earliest descriptions of magic. Magic, in its earliest form, is often referred to as the art. I believe that this is completely literal. I believe that magic is art, and that art, whether that be writing, music, sculpture, or any other form, is literally magic. Art is, like magic, the science of manipulating symbols, words or images, to achieve changes in consciousness. The very language of magic seems to be talking as much about writing or art as it is about supernatural events. A grimoire, for example, the Book of Spells, is simply a fancy way of saying grammar. Indeed, to cast a spell is simply to spell, to manipulate words, to change people's consciousness. And I believe that this is why an artist or writer is the closest thing in the contemporary world that you are likely to see to a shaman.
All right. So there we have a comic book writer, and we have a comic book writer telling you that his words are magic. And that's Alan Moore, by the way. Now, I'll ask you a question before I played the clip. And before I give my definition of the answer, I'm going to read from you from our God's Wear Spandex. This is page 59. This is written by Christopher Knowles, and he's not a Christian, he's a Buddhist. And so here he's talking about Aleister Crowley. Here it is. Crowley claimed to have contacted the original superhero, Horus, while he and his wife, Rose, were living in Cairo in 1904. Reportedly, Rose suddenly went into a trance and began uttering cryptic nonsense like, "It's about the child, and they are waiting for you." Crowley questioned her about this child and concluded she spoke of Horus. Claiming possession by a spirit named Aiwass, Crowley wrote the Liber Al, or the Book of the Law, in which he prophesied that the age of Horus, the age of kings and churches, is passing, and that the age of Horus will be born in fire and blood. In it, a new race of Supermen will emerge to purge the world of the weak and the weak-minded. Compassion is the voice of kings, stamp down the wretched and the weak, Crowley wrote. This is the law of the strong. This is our law and the joy of the world. And then it says, Aleister Crowley's prophecy had more to do with the reading of Nietzschean philosophy than with any real understanding of Egyptian theology. It's hard to argue with his insights. 10 years after the Book of the Law appeared, the Western world was plunged into a war whose savagery and misery would only be surpassed 25 years later when Hitler invaded Poland. At the same time, a new breed of self-willed Superman would enter the popular culture through the page of Action Comics, Whiz Comics, and Detective Comics. Crowley lived just long enough to see Horus usher in the new age, wearing many different masks and fighting under many different names. Unfortunately, Crowley died 12 years before the invention of spandex. And so we see that this whole thing was to bring in a new age. The spiritual realm is alive, and that's why you see all these things converging at the same time. The coming of the Lord is near. If you like our videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get all our frequent updates.